What's up, everybody? Sergeant Argerite here, and today, as requested by 501st in the comments, we're going to be reacting to Estonian War of Independence. First of all, I would like to say this channel is awesome. I really like their maps. They have this great series where they show, like, the Eastern Front, throughout each year. It's like a multi-part series, and they show the divisions. It's great. You should watch it. It's amazing. Um, but yeah, they just seem like they put a ton of time on their videos, and I really appreciate that. So, without further ado, let's get started. Is there no volume or something? What's going
November
on? Oh, there it is.
1918, Northeastern Europe.
Oh, go away.
Russia has been defeated in the Great War and has suffered two revolutions that have led to the communist Bolsheviks taking control of most of the country. Their power is being contested by the political opposition and remnants of the Russian Imperial Army who have formed the White Guard. Many areas of the country are engulfed in a brutal civil war. The western borderlands of the Russian Empire have been taken over by Imperial Germany. But now Germany has been defeated in the west and is forced to abandon its conquests.
No.
The German army prepares to leave the occupied territories as the Red Army musters its forces to begin the takeover. Meanwhile, many of the nations freed from the occupation don't want to be ruled by Bolsheviks, and they prepare to resist the Reds. Lacking armed forces, effective government,
Was Belarus really independent at that time?
and having politically divided populations, these new states attempt to hold back Red Army's advance. One of them is Estonia. All of Estonian territory had fallen under German occupation. In the end of
Whoa, it doesn't look like it from this map.
November,
Look at that thing right there.
the Estonian government had only been in power for a couple of weeks and was struggling to gather its forces. Meanwhile, Red Army was assembling near the border. Among them were pro-Bolshevik Red Estonian riflemen and the Red Fleet.
Wow, so even some of their own people were helping the Soviets.
Soon, most of the German troops had left, and the weak Estonian forces were unable to hold the line. On November 28, the Red Army attacked Narva. With this battle, the Estonian War of Independence began. Supported by the fleet, thousands of Red Army soldiers overran natural defensive positions in the forests of North.
Yeah, from what it looks like, they outnumber them 3-1. But I don't know how big their divisions are.
East Estonia. The Estonian army was constantly strengthened by new recruits, but morale was low,
and there's like a river there too.
And many men lacked the faith in victory and deserted the ranks. The next line of defense was established on Kunda River. By this time, the
They have more people now.
Estonian forces had grown in manpower, but the Reds broke through.
They still have like 1,000 down there.
And captured the town of Rakvere. At the same time, the Estonian forces were preparing to defend the town of Tartu. On that part of the front.
But so they're... What does that mean? Are there like white Russian soldiers as part of the White Army of Russia fighting with them or something?
The Red Army was numerically inferior, but Estonian troops were plagued by low morale.
Oh, talk about these guys.
Bolshevik agitators managed to incite some units to rebel, and the Estonian command lost the control of the situation.
Oh no.
Tartu fell to the Bolsheviks.
Wow, they pushed them past a river when they're numerically inferior. That is interesting.
Without any resistance, and the Estonian troops retreated to the north. Having witnessed the lackluster performance of the Estonian forces, the Red Army command came to the conclusion that the Estonian army would soon be defeated, and they began reassigning units from Estonia to other fronts. However, the balance of power was slowly shifting in favor of the Estonian side. Despite of constantly being in retreat, the morale of the troops began to improve.
Why? You're being pushed back.
Red Army continued to rely on its numerical superiority to push the Estonian forces back, but the strength of the Estonian troops was on the rise, and the resistance intensified day by day. On the 12th of December, the British Navy had arrived in the Estonian capital. They brought much-needed arms, including Lewis and Madsen light machine guns, a weapon unfamiliar to the Red Army.
That's nice.
The Royal Navy also captured 2 Red Fleet's destroyers and transferred them to Estonian Navy. When the Red
Are the Soviets gonna do anything about that?
Army units
They're just gonna let Britain do that?
reached
What the
only
heck?
40 kilometers from Estonian capital Tallinn, they had exhausted their strength and the Estonian forces put an end to their advance. Meanwhile,
Why does it show that their divisions are all the way back there?
while the government of the Estonian southern neighbor Latvia had far greater difficulties. Latvia had declared its independence under a nationalist government, but the Bolsheviks enjoyed a far greater degree of support among the local population. Therefore, the Red Army's elite units, the Red Latvian Riflemen, advanced through the country almost unopposed.
Wow.
The Latvian forces abandoned the capital city of Riga and retreated towards the west.
Did you even try to defend it?
In the westernmost corner of the country, they managed to establish a defensive line and
With one division, they established a defensive line.
Reinforced by German
Oh,
troops.
never mind.
On the
Those don't all look like German troops.
other hand,
So
Estonia
I'm confused about what those divisions are.
was able to successfully mobilize, and now many new units were arriving at the front. Estonian forces had also received help from its northern neighbor Finland. By the start of
Yes, Finland. Aren't they like friends or something in real life?
January, the numbers of the Estonian forces and Red Army troops had become equal
Well, what about the reserves?
on the front. However, the Estonian forces were better equipped. In addition to possessing light machine guns, they had several armored trains and had gained the command of the sea. The Estonian army began a counterattack. A strong push by their armored trains, coupled with an amphibious landing, forced the Red Army frontline troops into a retreat.
Wait a minute. I have a question. So whenever all those countries were independent, like Belarus and Ukraine and the Baltics and all Poland, all that, the Soviets went to war with pretty much all of them. What about Finland? Did they ever go to war with Finland? Because right here it says that Finland gave aid. I'm confused about that.
Their attempts to set up a defense near Rakvere failed when Estonian troops landed behind their lines at Kunda. The Red Army forces became overextended while attempting to counter.
Wow, they destroyed the division.
The threat from both sea and land. Many of their units became.
Also, let's talk about how small these divisions are. At least I think they're divisions. Like, the Soviets, their divisions are like 1,000 men strong, less than that.
Scattered or were captured during the retreat. However, soon the front reached terrain more suitable for defense.
Yeah. Soviets could probably hold by that river right there if they wanted.
The Reds managed to hold off the Estonian frontal advance at Jõhvi, but their position was flanked by a cavalry unit.
Oh, that is a weird character. Look at that little squiggly line over the O.
From the south, and they were forced to withdraw further. Now the Red Army occupied heavily entrenched positions at Sinimäed Heights, which were impossible to bypass. Estonian forces broke the deadlock by landing more than 1,000 men behind the Red Army lines at Putria. The Finnish volunteers broke into the town of Narva, and the encircled Soviet units at the front surrendered.
Wow.
Now Estonian forces established a defensive line on the
They just completely... Wow. That is
During the
amazing.
following months, the Red Army made several attempts to go on an offensive in this sector, but they didn't achieve much success. Meanwhile, the Estonian High Command was gathering forces to recapture Tartu. The armored train formation.
Oh yeah, don't they... Did they still have the numerical advantage?
And Lieutenant Julius Kuperjanov's partisan battalion decided not to wait for reinforcements and retook the town with a surprise night attack. Now the Estonian forces were in position to expel the Reds from southern Estonia. They directed the main attack towards the important railway junction of Valga.
There's like no Soviets there.
That sent the Red Latvian Riflemen against them, and here the best units of Estonia and the Red Army faced each other. With heavy fighting, the Estonian forces and Finnish volunteers pushed the Soviets back, and after a costly battle at Paju, they retook Valga. Meanwhile, other units crossed the Estonian-Latvian border and took up defensive positions along the strategic Ruyena-Valga narrow gauge railroad. On the eastern part of the front, Estonians were faced with demoralized Red Army troops mobilized from the war-weary Russian peasants. These units
Yeah,
disintegrated before the
those are
Estonian
not going to be very good units against the best Estonian troops.
army's advance, and soon the Estonian forces reached Petrograd, deep behind Red Army's lines.
Wow, and it's in. It looks like from the. Never mind, that's just a railway. Almost looks like they're in Latvia.
This threatened the Red Army's units with encirclement, and they were forced to withdraw. Now the Estonian forces had reached their national border, and their next goal was to establish forward
Nice.
defensive positions on Latvian territory. In the middle of February, they continued their advance.
Oh, not yet. Oh,
The Red
now
Army
they
had
are.
received large reinforcements and repelled the Estonian troops back
Jeez, they got a ton of guys out there.
into their territory.
Look
After
at
the
that.
initial defeats, the Red Army's forces had been greatly strengthened, and now they
Wow, they outnumber them almost 2-1.
were preparing to launch a large-scale offensive. However, the Red Army formations in Latvia and on the Pskov
But remember that the Estonians still have the advantage in equipment and foreign aid.
front lacked coordination, which allowed Estonian forces to defeat them one by one. The Soviets in the east began their offensive first by launching attacks from the front and over the frozen lake Lamjärv. After their
That must be really difficult.
advance had been fought to a standstill in March, they were joined by their Latvian comrades, who achieved some success in the south, fighting against the Estonian troops.
Why are the Latvians not fighting in their own territory? What are they doing in Estonia?
Stretched the Latvian Red Army's resources, and this
Yes!
allowed the Latvian White Forces and German troops
Good
to
job.
recapture most of western Latvia.
Also, what are the German troops doing there? It's 1919, which means they lost World War One. What are they doing over there? They were the ones who broke away from being Germany's puppets.
After having stopped the Reds, Estonian forces counterattacked and retook most of the lost land in the south. Then, with a concentrated assault carried out by armored trains, they recaptured Pechory and stabilized the
Dang.
front lines.
Remember, the Soviets outnumbered them almost 2-1. And look how, and they're still just destroying the Soviets.
Then the fighting was interrupted by the spring thaw. During the winter, the Soviets had been preparing for a major attack on Estonia and had organized new units. Now they were deployed on the front. All Red Estonian, Latvian, and Russian troops on that part of the front were organized into a formidable Estonian Red Army.
Wow, remember earlier that number was 12,000. Oh! This whole thing is a division. Wait a minute. All of those troops there are one division. And all those troops there are a whole army. Isn't that crazy? By the way, if y'all don't know, basically goes. Army is like one step down from division. Armies are made up of a bunch of different divisions. It's just incredible to me how this is a whole army that has multiple divisions in it, but it is so small. Anyways.
On April 17th, the Reds embarked on their most serious attempt to conquer Estonia. Due to the lack of ice cover, the Red Army was unable to attack over the lakes, and their attacks in the east were
Now they're attacking really slowly.
channeled in a small corridor and repelled. However, in the south, the Soviets' numeric superiority pushed the Estonian forces slowly back. The Estonian army had used up most of its reserves, and their defenses were stretching to a breaking point. Only some kilometers from Võru, the advancing Reds were temporarily stopped. Now the Reds attempted to break the stalemate by
Oh shoot.
a diversionary attack in the west. There the Soviets lacked numerical superiority, but the morale of the Estonian soldiers was low. Estonian troops were deployed in Latvian territory, but they didn't
What are these guys doing right there? Do something.
have the will to fight abroad, and were also exposed to propaganda by local Bolsheviks. The Red Latvian riflemen attacked and pushed the Estonian forces back over the national border, but they lacked the reserves for a follow-up attack. Eventually, the discipline in Estonian units was restored, and they counterattacked, recapturing all of the lost territory. Meanwhile, the onslaught of the Reds under Võru continued. Several weeks of unceasing fighting, along with intensive Bolshevik propaganda, propaganda took the Estonian soldiers' fighting spirit to its critical low. It was likely that soon the Red Army would overrun Estonian defenses. That's when a new force emerged. Since the beginning of the war, many former officers of the Russian Imperial Army had been gathering in Estonia with the goal of fighting the Bolsheviks. By the beginning of May, they had organized themselves into the Northern Corps, an elite formation of 3,000 men. On May 13, they executed a thoroughly planned offensive on the Narva front.
Oh, they destroyed that division right there.
Their forces penetrated deeply behind Red Army's lines through unfavorable terrain and broke into the rear of main Soviet formations. In support of their offensive, the Estonian Navy landed the Ingrid battalion behind Red Army's lines. The Soviet units, being threatened with encirclement, fled in disarray and the resistance to the Whites collapsed. Now...
Dang, that was crazy. And they are outnumbered like 2-1 on that front. And these divisions right there, troops, didn't do anything. It was just these guys, these Russians.
The Northern Corps reached into striking distance from Petrograd, the old imperial capital. The Soviet command could not afford...
It's still called Petrograd? I thought they would have changed it to St. Petersburg. I mean, to Leningrad by now.
To lose Petrograd under any circumstances. Reserves and forces from other fronts were scrambled together and thrown against the Whites. However, many of these units had mixed loyalties and defected to the Northern Corps.
Dang.
Ultimately, the Soviets mustered large amounts of troops and stopped the White forces.
Imagine, in real life, if they would have taken Petrograd. That would have been incredible.
Many of these units were...
By the way, if y'all don't know, Petrograd, well, now it's called St. Petersburg, is literally like one of the biggest cities in Russia. Maybe even the biggest. I'm pretty sure that's Moscow. Yeah, this is crazy.
Taken from Estonian fronts, and so the Red Army's position there became dangerously weak. After the Northern Corps offensive into Russia, some commanders of the Red Estonian Riflemen were coming to the conclusion that the Reds were going to lose the war. They decided to defect to the Estonian side. Estonian command decided to use this opportunity to capture Pskov. The defectors paralyzed the Red Army's command, which allowed units to advance quickly into the Red Army's rear. Many Soviet units got the false impression that most of the Red Estonian Riflemen had defected, and fearing encirclement, they fled without offering resistance. The Estonian White troops entered Pskov. The Red Army in Latvia had also been overextended. The German and Latvian forces...
There's like... The Soviets right now, this position is perilous. They're going to have to completely retreat out of there.
Exploited this by taking Riga with a surprise attack. Then the Estonians broke through the Reds' front near Võru and advanced deep into Red Army's rear, threatening to cut a bulk of the Latvian Soviet army off from Bolshevik Russia.
They are really overextended.
On Daugava River, they linked up with Lithuanian troops, cutting off the Red Army units in central Latvia. The Latvian Red Army had suffered a major defeat and lost much of its strength. However, a new danger was emerging from the...
And they can look at this area right here, this open area. They can just kill all the Soviets in there with just this giant attack. Or did the Latvians already occupy that territory?
South. The German forces operating in Latvia had
they do. Okay.
deposed the Latvian nationalist government and set up a puppet government consisting of the local Baltic German nobility. Estonia continued to support the previous Latvian government. Many Latvian units loyal to the nationalist government were already serving under Estonian command. Estonian and German forces met near the Latvian town of Cēsis. The German forces consisted of Baltic Landeswehr, a unit of Latvian Baltic Germans, and the Iron Division, consisting of volunteers from Germany. They were well equipped, but Estonians had the numbers and very high morale. This conflict was seen by many Estonian soldiers as the high point of the centuries-long power struggle between the local Baltic German landowners and Estonians. And
no, fight the Russians, not the Latvians. Come on.
They were eager to take part in the fight. The Germans attacked a Latvian nationalist unit and pushed it out of the town. After the initial clashes, the military missions of the Entente countries attempted to broker a peace between Estonians and Germans, but the talks failed. On July 19th, the Germans continued the offensive and the Baltic Landeswehr broke through the Estonian line. However, the advance of the Iron Division was repelled, and then the Estonians counterattacked at Cēsis. The German forces went into full
Oh,
retreat.
wow.
Their attempt
Look how much they're outnumbered. Wow.
to regroup at Gauja River was thwarted, and only on the entrenched position
Go to Riga.
before Riga did they manage to stop the Estonian advance.
Wow.
However, the arrival of Estonian fleet in the mouth of Daugava River threatened to cut off the Germans' path of retreat. Under the pressure of the military missions of the Entente countries, they were forced to sign an armistice and abandon their positions. The nationalist government in Latvia was restored and continued to be allied with Estonia until the end of the war. Meanwhile, the
Wow.
Red Army had gathered
Estonia is just crazy. Wow.
a strong force
They're just defeating everyone.
and began pushing the Northern Corps troops back along the whole front. The situation was especially critical near Pskov, where the Reds had large superiority.
Well, once they can move their troops over there, then they should be okay, right?
After defeating the Germans, Estonian units began to arrive to prop up the
Yes.
White Army's defense. Estonian command ordered its forces to
What are
push
these
the Red
guys
Army
doing?
deeper into Russia in order to create a buffer zone between Estonia and the Soviets. The attack was initially
They're gonna get so overextended if they try to do that.
successful, but Estonian soldiers lacked the will to fight abroad, and their performance suffered. The advance of the Estonian and White Army was stopped short of their objectives. The Red Army counterattacked, directing its main effort towards the Estonian army's communications and its path of retreat. At the same time, the Soviets pushed the Estonians and Whites back from the front. When the threat of being cut off became too real, the Estonian forces abandoned Pskov and retreated to the fortified positions on Estonian territory. For the rest of the war, this part of the front became stable, and only attacks of diversionary character were attempted here. The final act of the war took place in the north. Here, the Northern Corps had fought off the Soviets and increased their strength. The corps now consisted of 16,000 men and was renamed to Northwestern Army. Despite the increase in strength, the situation was becoming desperate for the Russian Whites. They were in danger of losing their base of supply, as Estonia was in the
Look how overextended they are.
process of making peace with the Soviets, and the Allies were about to stop delivering the supplies. The only fighting chance for them was conquering Petrograd with an army that wasn't fully prepared. First, they carried out
They're gonna really try to take Petrograd. No way.
diversionary attack towards Pskov, thus diverting some Soviet troops defending Petrograd. Then the main forces of the Northwestern Army launched an all-out attack on Petrograd.
That's not gonna
The
work.
Reds' defenses collapsed, and the Whites closed their distance to the city. The Estonian army had its own goal in this offensive. Their units were tasked with the capture of Krasnaya Gorka naval fortress in order to
It looks like they can just cut it off, right? Look at that little hole.
trap the Russian fleet at Petrograd. It seemed that the city was about to fall, but then Leon Trotsky arrived there and began feverishly organizing a defense. As the Red Army reinforcements were trickling to Petrograd by rail, the White Army's advance became bogged down and finally ground to a halt on the approaches to Petrograd. Now the Soviets
So close. 30,000 versus 7,500. They are not gonna do good.
counterattacked and began pushing the Whites back. The Northwestern Army, exhausted by continuous combat and having lost their hope for victory, began to lose its ability to fight. Their troops retreated towards the Estonian border. Meanwhile, peace negotiations were being held between Soviet Russia and Estonia. In order to secure a more advantageous border, the Red Army was ordered to capture the Estonian city of Narva. However, the Estonian forces had established extensive fortifications along the national border. Red Army attacked these positions in strength, but the defenses were well prepared. The battles here resembled the ones in the Great War on the Western Front. The Reds lacked artillery to achieve a breakthrough and took large casualties while pushing slowly forward. During November and December, Estonians and remaining Northwestern Army units repelled numerous Red Army assaults on their positions and were able to hold their ground. After the Red Army had exhausted its strength, a truce was finally signed on January 3rd, 1920. The Estonian War of Independence was over. It was officially concluded on February 2nd, 1920, with the signing of Tartu Peace Treaty between the Republic of Estonia and Soviet Russia. With the Peace of Tartu, the fighting in northeastern Europe started to come to an end.
What about Poland's War of Independence, though?
Lithuania made peace in July, Latvia in August, and Finland in October.
Well, not War of Independence. Oh, so Finland did go to war with the Soviets at the time.
1920. Poland followed in March 1921. So finally, peace came to Eastern Europe. It lasted for 20 years and then the region was engulfed in another war. We'll look into
Oh,
it in our
man.
next video. Subscribe not to miss it, and thanks for watching.
Wow. That wasn't 20 years. It was more like, I don't know, 18 years or something like that. But anyways, thank you all for watching. That was very interesting. Estonia, wow, they just kicked their butts. I wonder if they have a video about Poland's war, because that's also really interesting. But it's just so fascinating how this like really small country that most people have never even heard about just like um defeated the Soviet Union. I don't know, it's just so funny um how Estonia, this really small country, defeated the Soviet Union, but then Germany couldn't in World War II. But I mean, obviously, there were completely different conditions. But I just think the idea of it is funny. Um. Anyways, make sure to like and subscribe, and thank you all for watching, and goodbye.